friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using a stamp set from the Greeting Farm called Thanks a Sloth. I've stamped that image out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Full Bloom 6x8 pad. So I'm just pulling out my inspiration piece here and tucking it under my cardstock panel so I can pull my color palette from that. First I'm going to tackle this large adorable sloth, and I'm going to use some dusty browns for that. I chose E42, E43, E44, and E47. And because this image is so large, I'm going to break him down into sections. So first I'm just doing the two legs that are on the far side of the body, starting with the E47 and laying in a bit of shadow on the right side of each leg. And then I'm blending that out with the E44. I'll bring that up even further with the E43 and then save just a little bit of space toward the top for that highlight shade, the E42. Then I'm going to come down and do the other arm. It's the one that's wrapped around the flowers. And I'm also going to take that up into his head with that E47 once again. And doing a little bit of shading on both sides of the head just to help it look more rounded and also to kind of separate it from that back arm as well. So once again, blending out with that E44, just making sure to catch the edge of that E47 and pull that color into the next shade so that I don't get harsh lines here. Especially with those darker colors, it's really easy to leave a harsh line behind. So making sure to just go over the edge of that is going to really help. Then I'm continuing on with the E43, and I'm going to fill in the top part of his forehead with that E43, but I did save a little bit of room on his arm for the E42. And now I'm going to do the rest of his body. So I'm switching back to that E47 once again and just doing some shadow on the last leg and then down his back and also in the crease of his arm around those flowers. That would also be shadowed because the sun can't really reach there. So just carefully coloring around those blossoms and then blending that out once again. I just think these sloths are so stinking adorable. I think all three of them in this set are super duper cute, but this one here is definitely my favorite. I don't know, I just love the whole scene that he creates with the branch and the flowers. So I'm going to continue blending him out. I'm going to add just a little bit of shadow between his legs on his belly with that E43, and then continue filling him in with the E42 for the highlight on that last leg and on his upper belly. Once I'm completely finished with his body, I am going to do a second layer on him. I decided to keep it in the video today because it really does make a difference and I wanted you to be able to see that. So what I do is just very quickly go back over the shading that I've already done using the same markers, just increasing that saturation by adding that second layer. It also really helps smooth out the blend, and it just really adds a lot to your images. So this is something I almost always do. Sometimes I cut it out of the video if it feels like it would be too long, but this one was a little bit on the shorter side, so I decided to leave it in. I know I've asked you guys in the past which you prefer, and a lot of you want to see that second layer, so I decided to leave it in today. I'm just going in exactly like I said with the same exact shades, just going over the same exact places and quickly laying that in. It takes less time the second time because everything is already mapped out for you. You know exactly where to place your colors. You just have to go over them one more time. And I've had questions in the past about whether or not I wait a little bit for the markers to dry before I go in with that second layer. I don't. If you're using a very good quality cardstock like this Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White, it will hold that color and it won't bleed out of the lines if you're adding that second layer. If you are using like a cheaper quality cardstock and you see that you are bleeding out of the lines, then just wait a little bit before you go in with that second layer. So now I'm using the E42, E41, and E40 for the face. I added a little shading with that E42, blended out with the E41, and then use the E40 in the center for a highlight. And then again, I'm going over that a second time, just real quick and easy. I skipped the second layer of the E40 though, it didn't seem necessary. And now I'm going to do the patches over the eyes, starting with that E47 once again and pulling that color forward. I want the color that is over the actual eye to be lighter because I want those eyes to be very clearly visible, because that's, you know, what gives the face the personality is those facial features. So I always try to keep the area over the eye as light as possible. And I'll do a second layer on that area as well. Some color families need it more than others. There are certain shades that really don't necessarily need a second layer, especially if they're lighter, I would say. It's the darker combinations that really benefit from having that second layer and that smoother blend. For his little claws, I'm going to use E44, E47, and E49. So I'm putting a little E49 closest to the hand or foot, and then blending toward the ends with that E47, and just saving a little room on the tips of each of those little claws for the E44. And that area was small enough that I didn't bother with the second layer. It didn't seem necessary. So I'm going to add some rosy cheeks in using R11 and R20, just a little R20 on the cheek area, and then tracing around that with the R11. And I did decide to soften that up even further, so I'm going to grab the R000 and just trace around the outside of that one more time. And then I'm also going to use those shades to do the little lilac looking flower. There are no purples in that pattern paper, and I actually have pink lilacs in my yard. I have a whole bunch of different colors. I have 6 different lilac plants because they are my most favorite flower. But I have some pink ones and they're absolutely beautiful. So that's what I decided to do for those. And I just went back and added in some extra dots of dark color to help it look like tiny blossoms. So next I'm going to do the tree branch, and I went with some E20s. I wanted to choose a different brown than I used for the Sloth. And the E20s have a bit of a orangish reddish undertone to them, so I think it went really well with the color palette in this pattern paper. So I went with E23, E25, and E27. I put the E27 on the underside of the branch where it would be darkest, where the sun wouldn't hit. And then I'm blending up with the E25 and then filling in with the E23. I'm going to let that dry for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And then I'm going to come in with the E49 and add some wood grain texture to that tree branch. This is something I love to do. I just think it really gives your images more personality and just brings them even more to life. The leaves in that pattern paper are kind of like a dusty olive tone, so I went with G43, G94, and G99. I originally thought I started with the G99, but it turned out I had the G94 in my hand, so I just went back and grabbed that G99, and I'm coming down the center of that largest leaf and then adding a little extra on the sides at the very base of the leaf toward the branch, and then blending back out with that G94, and then using some of that G43 on the outside edges and filling that in. And then for the rest of these little leaves, I'm going to do like every other one with the G99 first. And this second one, I did the G99 on one side and then blended that out with the G94. And then for the rest of the leaves on the second side of that smaller one, I started with the G94 and blend it out with the G43. For that largest flower, I'm going to be pulling in the flower that looks very similar to it in that pattern paper, the one that has the red petals on the outside and then the yellow center. There's a couple of flowers that look very similar to this in that pattern paper, so you could go with different options, but I decided to do this one. So I used R24 and R29 for the outside, and then I'm using Y13, Y15, and Y17 for the center. Just adding that shadow on the right and blending up toward the top left. And I did do a second layer of that as well, just to increase that saturation, like I keep saying. For the last flower, I'm using BG10, BG53, and BG57, putting that BG57 down at the base of each petal, and then blending up with the BG53. Then I'll use the BG10 on the very ends of each of those petals, and I'll go back and do a second layer, trying to imitate that dusty aqua that's in that pattern paper. I'm going back with a second layer of just those darkest two shades on that one. And then I'm going to grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just go over the eye of my sloth, the one that's open, to make that nice and bright and shiny again. And then that is going to finish off this image. Then I'm going to take a Lawn Fawn Stitch Circle Stackable and line that up over my image. I want to leave room at the top for my sentiment, so I'm just going to get that positioned, tape that down into place, and then run that through my die cutting machine. Then I'm going to pop that out of the die, and I want to add a little bit of distress ink to the outside edges of that just to help it pop a little bit more. So I'm going to use some tumbled glass distress oxide ink, and I'm using very light pressure because this cardstock is not made for ink blending on. It's great for Copic coloring, but it's not so great for ink blending. So I'm just going to use very light pressure and just add a little bit of that color on the outside edges to help it look like a little bit of sky there that's kind of glowing. So it's also going to draw your attention even more to that beautiful stitching detail on the outside of that circle. So then I'm going to pop this into my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment, and I'm using one from the Lawn Fawn Rub-a-Dub-Dub stamp set. I wanted to create a Mother's Day card, so I'm stamping out Relax and Enjoy using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then I'm going to add the word Mom just above that, and I wanted it to be nestled closer than it could get if I would have stamped them both at the same time. So just making sure that that is lined up nice and straight on there, and then I'll use the door of my MISTI to pick that up, and then I can ink that up once again and stamp it down. So if you didn't want this to be a Mother's Day card, you could just leave off the word Mom, and you would still have a super adorable card that is for so many different occasions. So now I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using a piece of MFT's Snow Cone cardstock, and this time I'm using the Lawn Fawn Mom Plus Me stamp set for my sentiment, along with the Mom and Baby Sloth from that Thanks Sloth stamp set. So I'm stamping that down a couple of times to make sure I have a really good impression. I also used my stamp chamois to clean off those images, just to help them stamp a little bit more cleanly since the Sloth and Baby were brand new. So once I have that stamped down, I will go back to my pattern paper pad, and I want to choose another print to go along with this, actually 2 prints. So I'm just flipping through and trying to get an idea of what I want to use. There's a lot of options in this gorgeous pattern paper pad, but I decided to go with this orange linen looking print, and then on the back is this beautiful striped floral. So I'm going to use both of those. So those are the 3 pattern papers that I'll be using. I die cut all of those using the largest of the Lawn Fawn large stitch rectangle stackables. And now I'm going to glue them down onto my card front. I'm starting with that bold floral print that was our inspiration for our color palette, gluing that down to cover the entire front of the card, which is a standard A2 size card, 5.5 tall by 4.25 wide. And then I'm going to add that orange linen print going across the top of the card. And then I'll add that beautiful floral stripe right over top of that, so you get a little bit of that orange border on either side. Then I'm going to grab that focal panel. I've added some foam tape to the back of that to give it a bit of lift, and then I'm going to line that up in the center of that stripe of pattern paper. Make sure it's on there straight, and then press that down into place. So because I went with that orange linen pattern paper, I felt like I should tie in that orange color into the coloring a little bit. So I decided to add a little bit of dot detail on that lilac using YR12 and then a little bit of YR04. And then I'm going to blend back over that so it's not so prominent. I also added a little YR02 just to help that fade all the way down. And then I'm going to go back to my R20 and add a bit of shading and then blend that out with the R11. That'll just soften the dots a little bit more so they're a little more integrated into that floral. And I'll finish with that R000. And I feel like that ties in with the background pattern papers I chose much better now. To finish off this card, I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle, so I'm putting it on the center of the large flower, a little bit on the lilac, and then a little bit at the base of each petal of the blue flower. Then I'll lift this up so you can see that little bit of sparkle and shine that just adds to the card. It takes it to the next level. There's another peek at the inside, and I really hope you guys have enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Ring that notification bell so you're always alerted when I post a new video, which is every Monday and Friday. I'll have all of these products that I use listed and linked in the description bar below in case you want to check them out. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos that I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.